All right, today we're looking at the second half of the FDR's presidency, sometimes referred to as the Second New Deal. So the first New Deal that goes into place when he first becomes president. Now we're looking at like 1935, towards the later part of the 30s, early part of the 40s. The main thing with the Second New Deal is we're starting to see reforms aimed more towards the relief and recovery aspect of the New Deal goals of relief, recovery, reform. This is more towards how do we get people more jobs, how do we get through the long haul of the Great Depression. There were some criticisms of FDR and his New Deal. You had government officials and citizens who were saying that the New Deal is too much. The government is overstepping its boundaries. It's kind of a little bit like socialism. It's kind of a little bit like communism. It's too much government control and influence over the daily lives of people, too much control over businesses, too much control over industry. That's not the capitalist way. That's not the democratic ideals of American government society. So people were kind of making comparisons to the New Deal and how it's pushing America towards a more socialist or a more communist type of system. And in a lot of cases, some of the New Deal programs were determined to be unconstitutional by the Supreme Court. We talked about how the AAA, the Agricultural Adjustment Act, after 3 years of being in service, was found unconstitutional. The Supreme Court said, nope, the government can't tell and set and establish prices for farmers. It's too much government control intervention. And you had certain people like this guy, Father Charles Coughlin, pictured here, a very outspoken critic of the New Deal. He was very anti-labor union, very anti-New Deal. He was one of these people who were saying it's more like communism. He had some very radical views. FDR couldn't ignore all these radical views, so to some regards he would institute some New Deal programs to sort of deal with some of the issues that they're bringing up. But for the large part, people like Father Coughlin kind of go the wayside and they're kind of, they go away. But it kind of reflects this idea that there were people out there who were critical of FDR and did not support the New Deal efforts. Okay, so like I said, the Second New Deal starts in 1935. Its focus is on economic recovery, continuing the relief, the immediate relief for people, for families. There's a lot more changes in terms of the Second New Deal than the First New Deal. One of the big reforms, one of the work relief programs is called the WPA, the Works Progress Administration. And this is going to provide jobs to 2 million people from 1935 to 1941. And the WPA, it's going to give money to construction projects. It's going to also provide money to the arts. So writers, musicians, artists, all these people are going to get funded, which is going to lead to more jobs. So here we see some pictures. Like I said, here's an artist just kind of recording the work being done under the WPA. So he's just drawing a picture of people doing some work that's from these work relief programs. Here's sort of some abstract form of drawing here. The 1930s becomes this really prominent time of art and culture in American history. It's got its own, we develop our own style. It's pretty easy to kind of recognize 1930s Depression era art. Usually the themes are covering the problems that people are facing in the Depression, joblessness, homelessness. But there's a lot of imagery in art that is also reflecting some more positive aspects of American life too. So here's some promotional posters, flyers. They also put on plays. Here's like a flyer promoting a play. And some of these plays were just for entertainment purposes. Some were like informative plays to try and teach people about what government programs were trying to do and how it's going to help the nation. So a little bit of entertainment and informative as well. Just some more examples of art. So they put on these exhibitions for oil paintings, for sculpting, for drawings, anything to promote the arts, promote culture. Here we see some artists working on a giant painting on a canvas here. Also became really popular federal buildings and non-federal buildings. These giant murals and paintings would be painted like on post offices. Just to kind of liven it up, make it look better. A lot of scenes would depict American life, American history, American culture and heritage. Here's another post office. I believe this one is in Boston. You can see this big mural up top here, kind of reflecting some of Boston's history. The WPA also sponsored and helped fund construction jobs, whether it's building like sewage systems, water systems. Sometimes they were building bridges. Sometimes they were building parks. Any sort of typical construction job would fall under the WPA. Here we see a picture of some guys building a road, going from a basic dirt road to laying down some rocks, a foundation, then probably paving it afterwards. Our school, Union Springs, is a New Deal project in itself. The Public Works Administration, the PWA, started in 1936, and our school was finished in 1937. So here's my classroom right here, and this used to be the gymnasium, but our school is basically part of the New Deal. Also, some other local history: Watkins Glen State Park. That was a lot of the bridges that you see here and a lot of the stone pathways. These were all built during the Great Depression as part of the CCC, the Civilian Conservation Corps. So that was a long project, started in 35 and completed in 41. So the New Deal was, local, and it also had some impact across the whole country. Every state, there's tons of projects, tons of buildings and conservation projects all funded from this. Other issues in the second New Deal. Some other people, like Dr. Francis Townsend, was complaining, well, what do we do with all the retired people, all the elderly people that don't work and don't have a job, and how can we get them to contribute and be active members of the economy? He came up with this idea of, which eventually led to what's called Social Security. So the Social Security Act built on Francis Townsend's idea of let's provide money, let's provide something, government money to these, to the elderly, to the retired, so that they can be active members within the economy. At least if they're spending money, they're helping the economy grow. Why single out a portion of our country or our population of our citizens? Why not have them be active members and not just people who are not earning an income and not spending money? At least if we provide them with money, the idea is they can spend money to help stimulate economic growth. Also from 1935 to the early 40s, we see the labor movement starting to grow. Labor unions are starting to become more popular, more people are starting to get involved. Labor unions themselves are becoming more active in gaining rights. They're using tactics like sit-down strikes, where literally they'd show up to work, get to the factory or the assembly line wherever they're working, and they would just simply refuse to work. They would sometimes, in some cases, literally sit down to slow up production, which would eventually put pressure on the company to say, all right, let's meet the workers' demands, let's give in so they can get back to work and we can move on with making profits. We also see the invention or the creation of what's called the Wagner Act. The Wagner Act guarantees workers' rights to collectively bargain. Collective bargaining is just simply you have the unions basically getting together with management, the factory owners, to negotiate. Prior to guaranteed collective bargaining, you could essentially have management refusing to hear or listen to any of the unions or meet any of the demands of the workers. This way, it forces both management and the unions to come to the table to negotiate and try and resolve whatever issues the workers and management may have. So the idea of collectively agreeing is basically getting both sides together to come to a solution. Other issues with FDR and the New Deal in the second half. Because of some of the Supreme Court's rulings on some of his programs and how they found it unconstitutional, Roosevelt tries to tip the scales in his favor by packing the court, the Supreme Court. He tries to increase the Supreme Court justices from 9 to 15, and those additional 6 justices would be Supreme Court justices that favored the New Deal, that would support and go along with Roosevelt's efforts. So he was hoping that, instead of having them found unconstitutional, more of them would be passed and allowed to continue. He's trying to tip things in his favor in support of the New Deal. This didn't sit well with a lot of people. Democrats, Republicans, conservatives, liberals, everyone felt that this was too much by FDR. This is him overstepping his boundaries. That itself is not what the president should be doing. So he drew a lot of criticism for trying to do this. And because he gets the Wagner Act and the Social Security Act passed, he decides to kind of pull back and not push for the additional 6 Supreme Court justices. But by then it was too little too late. People had already made up their minds that he had made a wrong move in trying to push for this even in the first place. So he drew a lot of criticism for the Supreme Court packing, or trying to pack the Supreme Court. And in this political cartoon here, you can see him basically trying to argue, tell the ump here, hey, I know you're the ump of the ball game here, but you're supposed to be making decisions to favor my way. And another famous political cartoon, here's FDR, and he's got these puppets here, and he's kind of manipulating the puppets to basically go along with his New Deal programs here. You can see they're all saying, yes, yes, we all vote yes. And here's Uncle Sam representing the government, kind of astounded, looking like, hey, that's not how this works. All right, so FDR, the second New Deal, 1935 to the 1940s, early part of 1940s. Think of the Supreme Court packing case. Think of the WPA and all the expansion of public work programs. Other main idea, it's promoting this idea of economic recovery, continuing to provide jobs for millions of Americans and trying to pull us out of the Depression. The end result here of all this, it still doesn't end the Great Depression. The first New Deal doesn't end it, neither does the second. It kind of slowly chips away, but ultimately, it's going to take World War II to end the Great Depression.